we wanted to just talk about a few kind of political developments before we go to John's resistance report. Ali, can you talk about, you know, the EU? I mean, you mentioned in the interview with Donya, the EU and other Western genocide profiteers,
Mm.
are once again condemning, the level 5 catastrophic starvation in Gaza. They're condemning it. They're warning. They're, you know, uh, making all of these declarations. But as we always say, Palestinians can't eat statements. They can't eat condemnations. Talk about the European Union and its latest
Yeah,
statement.
yeah. I wanted to follow up on the discussion we had with our colleague David Cronin last week about how member states of the European Union, they had that meeting more than a week ago where they were supposed to consider sanctions on Israel. And this came after a review, an official review concluded that Israel is in breach of fundamental human rights obligations contained in the EU Israel Association Agreement. But they voted to impose zero sanctions, zero consequences. And that EU Israel Association Agreement gives Israel special trade privileges and other benefits. But instead of imposing even the most modest sanctions, the EU's foreign minister, Kaja Kallas, announced that Israel had agreed to voluntarily allow a bit more aid into Gaza. Those commitments had no clear parameters, no timelines, and no enforcement mechanism. And Kaja Kallas even said, as David Cronin told us last week, she even said that the goal is not to punish Israel. But the language of the Genocide Convention, of which every European Union member state is a signatory, states clearly that signatories have an obligation to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So international law actually requires punishment of
Right.
Israel. Um, Amnesty International, as you'll also recall, Nora, condemned the EU's decision not to impose any consequences on Israel as a green light for more genocide. And to absolutely no one's surprise, and as we just saw in the news and we heard from Dunya, that is exactly what has happened. Now, on Tuesday, and this came exactly a week after the EU decision to do nothing, Kaja Kallas posted the following on Twitter. She wrote, "The killing of civilians seeking aid in Gaza is indefensible." And she said, "I spoke again with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar to recall our understanding on aid flow and made clear that the IDF must stop killing people at distribution points." And then she says, "All options remain on the table if Israel doesn't comply, doesn't deliver on its pledges." So, just how seriously should we take this? Well, this is what Gideon Saar, the Israeli foreign minister, responded on Twitter. So, what he wrote is he confirmed that he spoke on the phone with Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign minister, about the situation in Gaza. And he says, quote, "I told her that Hamas is waging a campaign of lies while deliberately creating friction between the civilian population, the aid distribution centers, and the IDF. Hamas is the one shooting civilians and torturing them when they try to collect the aid. While Israel said yes to a hostage deal and ceasefire, Hamas is dragging its feet and sabotaging the negotiations." So it's very clear here, as we can see from what Gideon Saar said, that Israel does not even recognize the existence of any deal with the EU or any obligation under international humanitarian law. It's continuing to starve and massacre Palestinians openly while lying and blaming Hamas for the lack of food and for the mass killings at the supposed aid sites that everyone can see, and international agencies and people on the ground are saying that Israel is committing. There's no doubt about that. And yet she says all options remain on the table. And that's where the options have always been on the table.
Yeah.
This tweet by Omar Al Ayat caught my attention. He just gathered, really, he put together uh, a bunch of headlines that show how the EU has issued 4 separate warnings to Israel since May, and yet those options remain on the table. You can see that we can just cycle through them. That they keep making these threats. Um, so yeah, and then on Monday, so this is now uh, this past Monday, and this came after the EU declined to uh, impose any sanctions. 25 countries, most of them members of the European Union, but there were a few others like Japan and Norway and Switzerland, issued a joint statement that begins, and I quote, "We, the signatories listed below, come together with a simple, urgent message. The war in Gaza must end now." And they say the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. The Israeli government's aid delivery model is dangerous, fuels instability, and deprives Gazans of human dignity. We condemn the drip feeding of aid and the inhumane killing of civilians, including children seeking to meet their most basic needs of water and food. And they say that the Israeli government is denying essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population. So they're clear, these governments, even though they're EU governments, many of them strongly supporting Israel, are clear that Israel is denying humanitarian assistance to people. Um,
But what are they going
but
to do about it? I mean, that's always, yeah, exactly.
well, that's the
Right.
thing, is
Yeah.
that they could have put some muscle behind their words by actually imposing sanctions. And as we
Right.
talked about last week, they were given 10 proposals, everything from suspending the EU Israel Association Agreement to perhaps lesser sanctions, but they chose nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
they could have done something and they chose nothing. But I want to point out that, we're going to have more to say about Germany in a minute, but Germany was notably absent among the list of signatories of this statement. Germany would not even sign a statement calling on Israel to stop starving Palestinians. That's how far gone Germany is.
I mean, I think it was always that way. It was just kind of, like the ebbs and flows of masking it for the last 80 years, or longer. I mean, we know what Germany did in Southern Africa, of course. Um, I just, well, talk more about that. Talk more about Germany's conspicuous absence and why that's significant.
Well, yeah, as we discussed last week, it was our colleague David Cronin's opinion that Germany is the biggest obstacle to any EU sanctions, and that next to the United States, Germany is the most important enabler and supporter of Israel's genocide. And I think that message is getting through. I want to point to a story. This comes from the Southern California TV station KTLA, and they put this story and this headline on Twitter, and there's a story attached to it. And the tweet and the story say, "quote A hateful message was spray painted on the German consulate in downtown Los Angeles on Monday morning. Multiple people were seen trying to scrub and power wash the messages off the wall." And you can actually see in the photo uh, what this supposedly hateful message was. What's the hate speech against Germany that was on this graffiti? Quote, "Germany starves babies in Gaza."
Yeah,
And
that's factual. Yeah.
it's just a fact. It's just
Yeah.
a fact that Germany is helping Israel to
Yeah.
starve babies in Gaza. The proof of that is Germany would not even sign a verbal statement asking Israel to stop starving babies in Gaza. They
But
wouldn't even join the UK and France. I mean, these pro Israel countries, Germany couldn't even stand with them.
but
And
pointing that out
yeah,
is
is
supposedly
is is is
anti-Germanic
hate
hate
is
speech.
hate speech
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like it's anti-German hate to point out that Germany is again doing genocide.
We live in hell. Ali, can you talk a little bit about a new report published by some solidarity groups in Germany about the extreme levels of repression there. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in the UK. We're, of course, living in the US, but what's happening specifically in Germany?
Yeah, I just want to point quickly to this new report published this month called Repression of Palestine Solidarity in Germany. And it's a really detailed research report put together by a number of solidarity groups in Germany and supported by the European Legal Support um, Center, and it's available at that URL palestinaspricht.de/news if you want to read the whole report. But just to give you a summary, it says that the German state is actively enabling and supporting the genocide in Gaza, even after the International Court of Justice issued an interim ruling alerting all states to a potential genocide case. It's in this light that Palestinians in the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Germany are facing an escalating campaign of political repression that spans law enforcement abuses, legal sanctions, and censorship. And it just gives this overview. There's a lot of detailed information in the report, but in an overview, it says that basically since the start of the genocide, Germany escalated repression through ideological citizenship tests, Schengen-wide bans on Palestinian speakers like Dr. Hassan Abu Sitteh, and unprecedented deportations of EU and US citizens for protest participation. Protest restrictions intensified with language bans, excessive force and surveillance. International condemnation followed from the UN and Amnesty, marking a significant erosion of Germany's human rights reputation. And they detail all this. It's just important to know because the heart of the repression, the thuggery, the authoritarianism is in the countries that sing the loudest about how much they love human rights and democracy. And of course, I faced myself now two separate travel bans issued by the German authority, and I was threatened with prison and a fine for speaking to an audience in Germany via the internet, which I did anyway. I mean, I'm not going to take orders from the Germans,
No.
but that this is a notable report.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
because we want to highlight that this repression is, yes, it's in the US, yes, it's in the UK, it's across the West.
That's right. That's right. And don't forget, you were detained and imprisoned by the German side of Switzerland 6, 7 months ago. Yeah.
Indeed. And I don't have more to say about that now, but we are still challenging that in court. So I can't wait until I can update people on it, but that is not forgotten either.
No. All right. Well, turning to the US, let's talk about someone who, I mean, our colleague Michael Brown is just a dogged chronicler of one of the most hideous characters in Congress, which is a hideous institution itself. Randy Fine. He's a Florida congressman. Let's talk about what Randy Fine just posted. This is in reference to an ABC News story about 15 people dying of starvation in Gaza. His comment, it's very small there on the screen, but it says, "Release the hostages. Until then, starve away." Um, Ali, if I start talking about how nauseating and despicable this person is, I'll probably be thrown off the air. But why don't you? So why don't you take it away?
We live in an ocean of cruelty, our political culture, where our media, our so-called leaders, revel in the suffering of weak and marginalized people and revel in creating that suffering, whether it's against migrants, whether it's against people who are marginalized in society in any way. They revel in this cruelty. But this comment by Randy Fine, "Until then, starve away," uh, it just, you know, I recall, what was it, a couple of years ago that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, two members of Congress, faced censure
Yeah.
votes by the entire House of Representatives, including, by the way, from their own Democratic leadership for some comments that I've even forgotten. They were nothing. It was like a whole
Yeah.
storm and a manufactured anti-Semitism smear. And the House of Representatives voted to condemn them. Uh, and yet these comments by, Randy Fine is one of the worst, but he's by no means unique. Josh Hawley, who is he a senator? I think he's a
I
senator.
think
I
he's a
can't remember.
senator. Yeah.
Yeah, has made similar comments and others, and it's all just within our political culture, this absolute genocidal depravity. But Randy Fine's comment was um, almost too much for at least one significant segment of the Israel lobby. He actually drew a mild rebuke for that comment from the American Jewish Committee, a major Israel
Who
lobby group.
pays his
And
bills, right?
well, yeah, I mean, the job of the American Jewish Committee is to maintain support for Israel across the political spectrum. Similar to AIPAC and the ADL, it's in that mix. And what they say in response to Randy Fine's statement that Gazans should starve away, they say the serious humanitarian situation in Gaza must not be taken lightly, especially by those at the highest levels of government. Implying that starvation is a legitimate tactic is unacceptable. So on its face, that seems like a reasonable statement. But what I want to point out here is that this is just damage control,
Yeah.
because the American Jewish Committee, along with every other major Israel lobby group, has staunchly supported Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza since day one, while demonizing Palestinians and spreading atrocity propaganda aimed at justifying Israel's genocide. All the Israel lobby groups have done that. So this is damage control. Israel's supporters, like Randy Fine and many others, are becoming a liability in a context where a majority of the US public now views Israel negatively. So I think the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, saw Randy Fine's comment and said, I'm speculating here, but they know. We saw that Pew poll from a few weeks ago that now a majority of US adults view Israel negatively, and huge majorities view Israel negatively when you go into uh, sort of different subsections of the population. And they're looking at this and they're saying, this is just going to alienate more people. So they're trying to do damage control by presenting a human face to the Israel lobby,
Yeah.
but they have all supported it. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
point out that even for the Israel lobby, the open cruelty is becoming too embarrassing.
Right. They want the cruelty to just be less open.
They want to pretend it's,
Exactly.
even the way the American Jewish Committee phrases it, they say, um, the serious humanitarian situation in Gaza. So they don't say, they're not willing to admit that Israel is
Right.
doing this deliberately.
Right.
They're
Right.
trying to cover that up.
Yeah, as though it was a natural disaster of
Yeah.
sorts. Ugh. Well, thank you for that. Sorry about that as well. It's always it just like it's soul crushing to have to cover the just just disgustingness of these people. Speaking of which, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez caused a stir. Was I able to? Some people on on Twitter were saying that she actually like united the factions of the left in hatred of her over what she did a few days ago. Can you talk about that and why that's significant?
Yeah, and of course we're talking about Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's sort of the uh, most famous celebrity progressive in the Democratic Party in Congress, and I think at a certain point carried a lot of people's hopes, but she just seems to be becoming more and more a sort of a spokesperson for the Democratic Party elite, which is at odds with the vast majority of people who actually vote Democrat. So what happened is on Monday, she posted the following on the social network Blue Sky, and and by the way, I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but it's very interesting. She only put this on Blue Sky, which is a fairly small network, not a lot of people on it. She didn't put it on sort of on Twitter, which is a much more, or X as it's called now, a much more widely read platform. And she wrote, quote, "My record on Palestine speaks for itself. I'm proud of it. One of the strongest in Congress. I throw down for pro-Palestine candidates. Largely unrecognized work. That's fine. Disagreements are fine too. But if you want to toss all that for one half-assed MTG stunt, be my guest. I know where I stand." So here she's angrily scolding uh, people for uh, criticizing her and claiming that she's very pro-Palestinian. But let's break down what she means here. She refers to a half-assed MTG stunt. What does that mean? Well, MTG is the initials of Marjorie Taylor Greene, a far-right America Firster in Congress, a supporter of Trump, and who has been very Islamophobic and anti-Semitic in the past. Not someone whose politics I would share at all, but she has been more vocal than almost anyone in Congress about opposing foreign aid, including aid to Israel. And last week, she proposed an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Bill, which basically is the $1 trillion bill to fund the US military industrial complex. And that went to a vote last week. Her amendment would have cut US military funding to several foreign countries, including $500 million of funding for Israel's Iron Dome. And here's a clip of Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the military aid that her amendment would cut. And I apologize that this is on the program of the very unsavory Russell Brand, but that just shows you who she, you know, who her politics align with and who
Yeah.
she feels comfortable with.
What were the other ones? $500 million for Jordan, $500 million for Israel, $500 million for Taiwan. So I had entered amendments to strip those monies out, and here was the hypocrisy. They all failed. All of these amendments failed. I also had an amendment to block any funding to go to Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We are not obligated contractually to fund that war, fund that government, pay for anything there. The American people are so tired of it. So when you talk about the disconnect between leaders in Washington, D.C. and the American people, the disconnect is broad and wide.
Yeah. But okay, so Marjorie Taylor Greene, total wackadoo, right-wing, zealot, who surrounds herself with other, not just unsavory, but Russell Brand himself is, under investigation for sexual assault, I believe.
He
Um,
he's he has criminal charges for that in the UK. He hasn't
there you
faced
go.
trial yet.
Right. So anyway, that's where that happened.
Yeah.
But Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to defund Israel's Iron Dome,
Yeah.
and that's when AOC got very upset.
Yeah. So what happened is, as we just heard, Marjorie Taylor Greene was saying her amendments failed. In fact, in addition to Greene herself, only 5 members of Congress voted with her in favor of her amendment, which would cut military aid for Israel and the other countries she mentioned. And I'm going to mention them because I think it's notable. They were Republican Thomas Massey of Kentucky and several progressive Democrats, Al Green of Texas, Summer Lee of Pennsylvania, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, and of course, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. AOC is not one of them. She voted against that amendment. And that prompted a lot of anger at AOC, at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, especially after she tried to defend her vote in the following manner. And so this was a tweet that she posted actually on Twitter on July 19th, just the day after the vote. And she says, Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel, nor end the flow of US munitions being used in Gaza. Of course, I voted against it. What it does do is to cut off defensive Iron Dome capacities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. So that just created a firestorm of outrage against her, because what she's trying to do here is create a distinction between so-called offensive and so-called defensive weapons for Israel. And of course, all US military aid to Israel is described as defensive. The United States War Ministry is called the Department of Defense. They don't call it the Department of Invasions, Military Coups, and Aggression. That would be an accurate name. They call it the Department of Defense. So everything that is given to Israel is marketed as defensive.
Defense.
But among the points, I mean, you go through just thousands and thousands and thousands of responses to AOC that are extremely negative. And some of the points that came up, I saw several people making, is that her claiming that Iron Dome is defensive, that's like someone saying, I didn't give the gun to the mass shooter, I only gave him the bulletproof vest.
Right.
That's the equivalent. I thought that was a very vivid analogy, and not far off the mark, given that Israel is using the shield of the Iron Dome in order to mass murder Palestinian children with total impunity. And some other people remark that Israel is perpetrating a Holocaust. You shouldn't be giving them any weapons at all. And to say that you should would be like saying it would have been okay to give so-called defensive weapons to the Nazis during the Holocaust, but not offensive weapons.
Right.
It's just outrageous. And AOC also tried to defend her vote by arguing that even though she voted against Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment cutting the Iron Dome funding, she still voted against the defense bill as a whole. But that really cut little ice with her critics. And I guess the reason I want to talk about this is that, to me, I think it's notable that AOC was one of the biggest public supporters of Zohran Mamdani, who won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York, and who is in a prime position to be elected mayor of New York City in November. And so, given the pressure he is under from the Israel lobby and from the state of Israel itself, it's just, I think it will concern a lot of people that this is where AOC's politics are, and where that political alliance might lead.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the bigger point to me is that it really shows that much of the so-called progressive left in Congress has abandoned the anti-war agenda to the far right, to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, instead of putting forward a principled anti-war, anti-imperialist agenda. And so people are left with nowhere to turn. And I see people saying, oh, well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is the good person, or a stopped clock is right twice a day. That may all be true. But then why is it only Marjorie Taylor Greene putting forward these amendments and making this case? Stand up and do it. Let decent people who don't engage in the kind of Islamophobia or anti-Semitism that she has in her record, let them stand up and do this. Don't leave it to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And yet they've completely abandoned the field, and people have nowhere to turn. And that is contributing to really the collapse of liberal, so-called liberal and progressive parties, not just in the United States, but across the West, because in the UK, the Labour Party, the party traditionally of the working class, is the party of genocide in Gaza. In Germany, the Greens, a party founded to oppose nuclear weapons and nuclear energy and to protect the environment and to protect human life, is one of the parties of genocide in Gaza. And so this has completely scrambled and destroyed our politics. And where are people supposed to turn?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what it's the definition of controlled opposition. The Democratic Party, you know, is
It's not even opposition.
it's not. It's really not. It's just controlled party politics. That's the U.S. empire working as it was designed.